It's Tammy Gerber here talking today about argumentation, but I'm going to start with a little business for my Comp 101 students. So don't forget that you need to be looking in course checking announcements and your email that you're using as your preferred email for Vincennes for that week. Don't forget that your syllabus is also in course documents, which gives you a shell for sort of what's coming long term. But be paying most attention to the agenda, the weekly agenda, as it explains exactly what is coming up that week and what is due, because there are a few minor modifications as we move along the syllabus. So I'm going to start by just looking at the agenda. I'm going to read from it so I don't miss anything. To begin with, the agenda says that you're to log on to Khan Academy. You have some grammar exercises to do. That is the way that we are practicing grammar. It's my main focus for this class to talk about writing and give you feedback and help improve and advance your writing by using that feedback and just having these conversations about what makes a good some effective communication, whether that be in writing or speaking. It's those conversations and looking and examining patterns of development. That's my main focus. But at the same time, it's important that you have the solid foundations of grammar that you may or may not have from secondary school and, you know, those past experiences that you've had with grammar. So the Khan Academy ensures that you have that piece along with this being able to think critically and examine your sources and take all of what you're thinking about and pull it together into some kind of communication. And for this class, it has to be composition and writing. Log on to Khan Academy. I've assigned a unit on syntax, and that involves sentences and clauses. It's due April 9th, so you have 7 days to complete that. As you had some experience with it before, you know that each exercise is only about 4 questions. So while it looks like it might be a lot of assignments, it's really not. I would say at most, doing the entire unit would take someone who maybe, you know, needs that refresher a couple hours at most, probably less than that. That grade goes into the Comp 101 class, not the 079. So I am grading for the entire program. So all of the exercises should be completed. And then I'm basing your grade on what you, how you performed on the very last unit test. But you can't get that grade without doing the work leading up to it. So look to see that you did all of the exercises up to it. And if you did, then a grade that is on the unit test is the one that goes in that slot worth 40 points. In the past, I made these assignments and only asked that you do the unit test because I was considering the fact that you may already know the content. There wasn't any need for you to do that. If you remember, we started with parts of speech. So it's my assumption that most of you already know the 8 parts of speech, and you probably didn't need to do the smaller exercises leading up to it, but that unit test tells me whether you actually do have that knowledge or not. However, as we're getting to the end of the Khan Academy program, we're getting into more complex issues where you need, you know, most likely a little bit of a refresher, even if you're a pretty solid student in grammar. And I'm finding that I'm right because as I'm looking at what students are doing, I'm seeing that, you know, you're missing some in those exercises. So it is necessary to have that refresher. The next 2 units are also kind of getting more sophisticated, so you'll be completing them all rather than just a part. So there's nothing confusing about it because I'm asking that you do it all now. So we log on and we look at what's been assigned for April 9th and do all that is there. It doesn't matter whether you watch the videos. I'm not grading the video, whether that's checked or not that you looked at that. Only watch the videos if you need it to accomplish the exercise, which some of you might need that video refresher. That's up to you. So if it says active, you're seeing what is currently assigned. Now, some of you that might have missed some work in the past and you looked on your grades on Blackboard and you noticed that, hey, I don't have this turned in. If you have questions about that, go to the tab that says past to view any assignments that have been made in the past. They're not going to automatically show up because it's going to show up what's active, and that's only what I assigned today. Okay. So also on your agenda, I'm asking that you look at the compare contrast essay that you've already submitted and that I've already given you feedback on. So what I'm requesting is that please, without having class discussion and conversation, me giving that advice, direction, guidance, and support to you through communication on your paper is very, very important to your progress. So please look, see what comments I made to you. They are directly on there. Don't get confused if there is a comment and something doesn't exactly coordinate with what's been highlighted. So here's the thing. I could download your paper on my Mac and save it in Word and do a little better job of making the comment go directly with what is highlighted. But then I have all of those documents on my computer. So I decided sometimes I do that for you if there's something I really, really need to make sure the right thing is being highlighted. But for the most part, doing it directly on Blackboard works. It's just occasionally it won't allow me to highlight all of what I wanted to really, like, say I wanted to talk to you about a whole paragraph, it may only let me highlight a piece of it. So just don't let that confuse you as you're looking at that feedback and think, well, why does she only have this part highlighted, but she said this and it looks like it's talking about the whole thing. So the highlight just sort of gets you close to the problem because I can't always highlight exactly where that is. And then what's really important is that you read the comment. I put a video lecture on last week. This is my video lecture for this week. Last week was talking about the compare contrast as a pattern of development. This week we're talking about argumentation. It's this YouTube video, so I'm offering a link to do that, to view that. And also, you can call me at any time. I've put my phone number out there to everyone. I'm open to emails if you need to speak to me in that way. I had 2 phone calls from some students today, and I feel like, we made a lot of progress on writing where they're headed and writing their arguments. So feel free to do that. I will be offering a virtual collaboration on Thursday. So at 10:15, you'll get an invitation prior to that. But at 10:15 on Thursday, you can connect with me through Blackboard Collaborate. All you have to do is follow the link that's going to be in your email. You really don't have to do anything other than that. I'm just telling you that it runs through Blackboard. Now, I tried it today, and 2 other students tried to also join, and it didn't work on my end because my Wi-Fi isn't very strong. So I wasn't able to connect at that moment, but they were. So I know that it works. I'm going to try this week using my hotspot. And if that doesn't work, then I will try next week using Zoom instead, because I have a feeling that might take less Wi-Fi, which would mean it'd be easier for other people who don't have a strong Wi-Fi source either. So we'll try again this week on Thursday with an invitation you're getting from Blackboard. It's using the Collaborate tool, and if that doesn't work, then next week I'm going to try the Zoom. I'm not making it a requirement because I know that is an issue that some people can't join at that moment because of their Wi-Fi situation. So it'll be an open forum, me there virtually to answer any questions, have a chat discussion. won't last very long. You can get your information in terms of better understanding the content through these video lectures. Again, you can call or you can email. So our focus for the rest of the class is to prepare to write the last paper, which is the argument. Don't get confused. There are different terms I'm using, like research paper, argument persuasive. It truly is an argumentation persuasion pattern of writing that we're using. It is an argumentative essay is how I've shortened it in the assignment category on Blackboard. It's called argumentative essay, but it is the research paper that we're talking about. So that's all just one thing. There's one paper left for you to write prior to your final exam, and that's this argumentative essay. So we're going to be really focused on resources and researching. If you look on Blackboard 101, Comp 101, in course documents, there is an outline for what is required in this argumentative essay. So it tells you what you need to do, how long it has to be, and how many sources. So you'll see that it says 5 sources. We're going to start today with me assigning that you find 3. So we're going to try to break this down into pieces, making it easier for you to write that paper. So I'm assigning today for you to find 3 articles from the SHAPE library and read them and just, create some type of a summary based on what you learned from them. And you'll begin a works cited document. So what I would recommend first is create your works cited document. Now, we're not going to use the word works cited. That's what we've been doing all along because we've been using MLA, Modern Language Association. That's what MLA stands for. It's just a style guide for creating a paper, a professional paper. For this last paper, we're going to use APA because I promised that at the beginning of the year. I have a lot of nursing students that are going to be required to use APA. APA stands for American Psychological Association. Not that it matters, but that's what it stands for. And it is a style guide for writing papers, typically, that are more science related. So our business students, our education students, our English students are going to be leaning more heavily on MLA. Our science field, psychology, sociology, APA. So it's important that they get experience with the style that they're going to need to use for their coursework. So that's why, to be consistent, all papers were MLA to start with. And now for this big paper, so we can kind of balance what is done with that, it's going to be APA. It's nothing to worry yourself and be overly concerned about. There's some just minor differences. So we're still going to write our paper using 12-point size 12 font and Times New Roman. But we will have for this paper, and if you look at page 483 in your Vincennes University Handbook, there's a model APA paper. And on page 483, if you want to grab the Vincennes University Handbook, I'll wait just a moment. Okay, and if you turn to page 483, you'll see there is a title page. So there's one difference between an MLA paper and an APA paper. An APA paper has a title page. And you just look at that title page on page 483 of that sample paper, and yours should look exactly like that, putting in your information. All right, turn the page. There is an abstract for a APA paper, which is different because MLA doesn't have that. So most science articles have an abstract, and it's just a summary and sort of a preview. If you think about a movie, and if you would watch a trailer for a movie, for example, they're going to give you a little bit of information about what the movie is about. So that's what you're going to do for what your paper's about. I will talk more specifically about that later. We're not ready to write the paper right now, just putting it out there. If you move on to page 485, you're getting into the meat of the paper, and if you just kind of flip through, you can see that this sample uses a variety of in-text citations. Let's just look at the first in-text citation that is on page, I'm going to look at the simplest form first. Look on page 486, which is page 4 of the sample paper, but 486 in your book. And if you go to the second paragraph, you see where it, in parentheses, it says Carpenter, comma, 2001. So that's the simplest way to do an in-text citation. So Carpenter, and this is all in parentheses, okay? So there was a line, a sentence made that needs to be documented because it came from one of the sources. So that's what's going on here. So you have parentheses, you have the author's last name, a comma, and the year of the publication, and then another parentheses. And your period is at the end after the parentheses, just like MLA. So the difference here is MLA, there's no comma after the author, and we use page numbers. And if you're reading an article online that doesn't have page numbers, you do nothing. But that's different in APA. It's the date, it's the year. However, there are times where you may want to refer to a specific page or a paragraph. So bring your eyes up to the top of page 486. And the very first line there starts with an in-text citation that does just that. So in this example, and you have to go back to 485 because it actually starts at the bottom of that. In this example, there is no author. So we're using the title of where this document came from, which is this National Sleep Foundation. Then there's a comma. Then there's the year, 2002. Then there's a comma. And then we have paragraph, P-A-R-A, which stands for paragraph, period, because it's an abbreviation, and 6, and then parentheses. So that's an example that you would want to refer specifically to a paragraph rather than just to the source. Typically, you probably just need to put the author or the title of the thing that you're referring to and the year. But if it was page, it would just be P, period, and then space, and what have you. You do write out the word section if it happens to be a section. Okay, so let's move over to the work cited on page 492 in your Vincent's University Handbook, page 492. So here's a sample of what it would look like to document your sources. You can see it's very similar to MLA. Everything starts on the left. The entries start on the left. And if there's more to the entry, then it's indented. And then when you go back to a new entry, then you go back over to the left. Only change I think you'll see for the setup of the page is that it's now titled References rather than Works Cited. So that's how that's going to be. And then another change that you probably are seeing right off the bat. So it starts with the author. Then right after the author is the year. So the year in APA is really important. And I think you're already seeing that. So the year comes after the author. It's in parentheses always. And then after that, you're going to put the title of your document. So notice that these titles of articles, sections, chapters, if you scan through the reference list on this page, they are not in quotations. So that's another change. In MLA, we put those short titles in quotations. There's nothing. So you don't do anything other than just the title. Now, you will notice that after the section, chapter, article, whatever it is, that title of that, you will see the name of the host, whether it's the website or the magazine that that article was featured, or that section or that chapter, and that is italicized. So that's the same. The titles of books, movies, Larger works are still italicized in the reference list. And then if it's an article on online, then you're going to have your URL. So it's really, like I said, it just small little slight changes. And that's why we're going to start with the works cited reference page first, and then write our paper last to take away that stress. So for this week, your assignment for this week is to select 3 articles. So I'm asking that you go to the Shake library. It is not hard to use. Please don't let that be an intimidation for you. I know that we're so used to looking things up and researching just using Google. And Google is a great, powerful search engine, and that's why we love it, because it can just populate something off of one word. Millions of different things have been said about that. However, it's limiting. Is if you think about it, if someone is going to the trouble to copyright their work, they're not going to have it available just for you to be able to find for free. So when you start digging into really wanting good research, you're going to find out that you're going to find articles and you can't get to them without paying some kind of a subscription or a fee to retrieve them. That's why we need to use the Shake library. If we're going to get academic articles, we need to use the Shake library to do that. So if you just go on, you log on to BUJC over on the left-hand side, click where it says library, and then there's a search engine right there. And you really, because it's not quite as powerful as Google, but remember, you're going to get higher quality articles. So that's why we're using it. You have to think a little bit more deeply about what are the keywords that I'm looking for. So today, for example, I had a conversation with Stephanie about her paper. She's wanting to write something about vaccines. And we had to really think about what was it she wanted to say about vaccines to get the right kind of article. So when we dug a little bit deeper and had more conversation, she realized that she was really interested mostly in flu vaccines more than anything. Now that might change, but by typing, just adding that one word, flu and vaccines, and nothing else, she found a lot of articles that fit what she wanted to write about. So it's important to figure out what are the key words. I mean, think deeply about what am I really wanting to argue? And you need to remember the concepts of argument. So when we're writing, we want to think about the rhetorical situation, which is the audience, the situation and I'm writing in itself, and myself as the writer. So those are the three most important things. Now, this week in your chapter on argumentation, it talks about another concept that's very important to writing, which goes along with the audience, and that is logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos is the logic of what you're arguing. So you pay attention to the logic of it, that it follows a logical format in terms of organization, and the content is logical, and you focus on that. You also pay attention to the pathos in an argument, which is the appeal that you're going to have to the emotions of your audience. And then you're paying attention to the ethical piece, that's ethos, which is how do you present yourself as being credible to your audience, like an expert, someone who we want to listen to. So you keep those things in mind as you're writing. Okay, so once you have established a possible topic, and even though you turned in possible topics and possible thesis statements to me, you can change the thesis statements. You shouldn't just be okay with, even though you got your points from me, you may find that when you start researching that now your thesis has changed because after you've done some studying, you have a different opinion. And so you don't want to write a paper stuck on that thesis that you originally started with, because now you're more educated about the topic. So change the thesis to match what your new knowledge is, if that is needed. And we need to have a conversation before the actual writing of the paper to be sure that your thesis is one that I approve and that, yes, this will work for your paper. We want you to be successful, obviously. So you're paying attention to your audience. Your audiences would be me, would be your classmates, because at some point we will upload the introductions to our papers and let our classmates read them. So we have to dig deep to see, what do we want to talk about? Now, in selecting those topics and deciding what, I've asked that you select something that deals with your field. So whether you're a business student, whether you're a nursing student, whether you're an English student, you really need to identify, maybe you haven't decided yet, but where are you leaning, and then work to find an issue in that field that is a concern. It needs to be something that's debated in the field so that you have something to argue about. And then you may have a general idea about what you want to argue about, but really, really honing in on what you are going to be arguing. So, for example, I had another discussion this morning with Monica about her topic, and I'm going to use her as an example because it was a really good conversation that we had. So she wanted to write about, and I don't have her thesis in front of me, so I'm just going to kind of remember and give you an idea of what it was, but she is talking about this issue of the connection between fast food and inactivity that leads to obesity, and the issue around obesity and health problems. So when we got to talking, I said to her, you think anybody would disagree with you that fast food's not good for you? She agreed that no, they wouldn't. Anybody disagree with you that you should be active? No, they wouldn't. Now, that's not to say we don't want to say that, but let's decide what we really want to help our audience understand. And as we dug and we had this great conversation and we dug deeper into it, we realized that she really wanted to talk about what kind of habits would prevent a person from leaning on, using fast food too often and not being active enough. And it boiled down to time. And so to make an effective argument, she's going to focus on what is out there, what are some experts saying about how we can manage our time and create habits to have a healthy lifestyle. So she started with this simple idea, and now it's become really more narrow, and she has something to argue. And I can't wait to read her paper to find out, what she uncovers. What are some experts saying about time and management, creating habits? And the same thing with another student. We had a conversation about vaccines, and I can't wait to hear what she uncovers. She had this theory, which I love. I mean, that's where we want to start. We have these theories about things. So she has this theory about, is it possible that by getting frequent flu vaccinations, there would be some connection to reduce immunity for things that aren't for that vaccination? Or is it the opposite of that? That every time we get a flu vaccination, we are increasing our antibodies in a way that our body responds to different germs and viruses and things, that it's stronger because of it. So really interesting topic for her to explore, and she will base her thesis around what she finds out. So again, to qualify, you should have already turned in a possible topics and thesis that was on last week's agenda. And I might have given you all of your credit, but that doesn't mean it's over. as you start doing this research, that could change. You might change your thesis statements. Now, with that being said, this week, find 3 articles around your issue, read them, and summarize them. So you're going to create this reference page. It's going to say references at the top, or for this piece, you can call it's an annotated bibliography is really what we're creating. For right now, if you want it titled annotated bibliography, that's fine. And you just basically follow the APA guidelines from your Vincennes University Handbook, starting on page 465. You put the all of the pieces that you need to document the source, read from your source, and then under that, write a paragraph about what you read. So you're going to do that for 3 sources. And, you know, this is, I was talking to some students about this. I had never completed an annotated bibliography prior to graduate school. And when this was assigned to me in graduate school, I was amazed at how easy it was to write the final paper because I had all the research done. I had already summarized what everybody said. And it also helps keeps you from getting too much from your source, so that, you know, it lets you kind of remove yourself from it from a little bit. So you're not like trying to just rephrase what you just read. You kind of distance yourself because you've done this research and now you're digging in to write the paper, and you'll end up finding your voice and reflecting more on what you want to say because of it. So it's really a powerful tool in writing a paper. I would never again ever start writing a research paper without starting first with an annotated bibliography. So again, you write 3 sources the way you would have them on your reference, everything the way it should be, because we're trying to get that reference page, that works cited page done before we write the paper. And then you have a short little paragraph about what you read in those articles. So that and the Khan Academy is all that's due for next week. So it's just kind of the first stage in preparing for your paper. I provided a link in your agenda to Purdue OWL for an example of what a little paragraph or an annotated bibliography looks like and what it looks like in APA. So just follow that link and there's a sample. But you're going to have 3 entries. There's just 1 entry. Also look at page, let's see. Page 492 in your Vincennes Handbook, that's a sample of what a reference page looks like. And the only difference is that under each entry, you're going to have your paragraph under it. All right, and let me check over your agenda, see if I have covered everything. I have. So that's all due for next class. And so let's talk now about argumentation. So the goal in learning about argumentation is that you can effectively use it in your writing. How do we get there? How do we get better at doing that? We recognize what qualities make it this pattern of development. You read models, so make sure you've read at least 1 or 2, one from your chapter or some of the ones uploaded on Blackboard. It might be a benefit to read one that's in APA, but if you're looking for content, I would not read an MLA example because I think the content is more important than the format in terms of learning the pattern. You need to identify what's a solid resource for the research, that we're focused on that, on not using blogs and just random advertisements and web pages that we find that might have something on it that we like because it falls into our argument. We need to, look for quality sources. So if I'm writing about something in the science field, I need to be finding a source from that is news from the news area, political arena, and Wall Street Journal. Those are Business Week, things like that. So think about what your profession is going to be. You've selected your topic around that. And then the next step is start identifying academic sources that would be good quality sources for your research. we want to, when we're ready to write, we want a powerful thesis statement. So I'm looking now at my PowerPoint, and that's found in course documents. So I'm on the second slide of my PowerPoint. A good use of writing, another reason that we want to use argumentative writing and think about it is it makes us think. Argumentations use clear thinking and logic. I think, if we come back to that, we're going to have better paper. If we think about that, it should do that. It should present clear thinking and logic. It works to justify your opinion. So we research to justify our opinion so that it becomes more than just an opinion. The third bullet on the third slide says it involves strong research and recognizes the other side of the argument. So that's important. You have to recognize the other side in order to have a quality argument, because there's no, that's called a warrant. When we refute, when we come back and explain why what we're saying is what it is. So that warrant connects the evidence to the thesis statement. And then the refutation, when we refute or turn back, is when we mention the other side, and then we say why that isn't so. On slide 4, it gets into what Nadel and Langen say about persuasion, that it's emotional language. It appeals to it's the dramatic appeal. How do we do that? Through word choice. We want to select words with strong connotations that contribute to the emotional response. Remember that a connotation is not just the dictionary definition of the word, but like this overall feeling that word gives. So slide 5, I talk about what's the difference between argumentation and persuasion, or, how do we look at them together? So argumentation, persuasion, which is what we're focused on in our writing, combines the logic and the emotions together. So we look at all aspects, the logos, logic, pathos, emotions, and the ethos, which is establishing our credibility through sound research. Slide 6 is talking to you about how to determine what kind of audience you're going to have before you write. So, are you going to have a supportive audience? Do you anticipate that myself or anyone else in the class might not be supportive of what you're going to say? If that's true, then there will be a different approach. For example, the book says, if you know that you're working with a supportive audience, you might include topics that connect your shared views or not include certain aspects of the argument that your audience already understands. So if you think they're going to be supportive, then there's no need to convince them of certain things, but you want to establish a common ground, because maybe you want them to kind of get fired up with you, to be passionate like you are about this topic. If you suspect that you're going to have a wavering audience, then Nadel and Langen say that you might want to decrease the pathos, so less appeal to the emotion and focus more on the ethos, the ethics, the credibility of you as a speaker, and the logos, the logic. If you know that your audience might be hostile to what you are going to say, then you're going to want to avoid using heavy pathos, because you might turn them off right from the start. So you want to focus more on the logic. So again, you're going to have you're going to suspect that you'll have a supportive audience, a wavering audience, or hostile, and whatever you decide that's going to be needs to be accounted for in your approach. Strategies for writing the argument. I'm on slide 7. Start with pre-writing. That's where you choose a controversial subject. This is important because that's how you should start your paper. You're going to throw the controversial subject out there. So you're going to say this, whatever the issue is, it's going to be revealed. And then as you progress through that first paragraph, you'll end with your thesis, which is the statement of your stance, your conviction on that issue. So that's really an important concept. Put the issue out there and then progress to the conviction you have over that issue. And that, helps you fill that first paragraph and understand, what you're doing in that introduction. When you identify the thesis, you're going to use inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. So let's talk about inductive reasoning. I think I have a slide on that. Let's see. Maybe not. So inductive is a building up. So you go examples, example, 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 until all those examples build up to your claim that this is, okay, here's all this evidence, we pull all that together, and here's the assumption we can make because of it. Deductive reason would be you start with this assumption you're making, and then you break apart all the situations that would support or give you the inclination that what you have started with as an assumption is correct. So again, an inductive approach is starting with all the little steps building to the final assumption. And deductive is starting with the assumption and then tearing it apart, making the connection. So kind of decide whether you're doing inductive or deductive thinking there. Support your thesis by addressing the logos, pathos, and ethos. We talked about that. Organize your evidence. Tolman's logic, it talks about Tolman's logic on page 453. This means that you state the claim, support it with data, and provide a warrant or an assumption that connects the data to the evidence, the data or the evidence to the claim. So that's all that is making that logical kind of circle there. So here's the claim, here's the support, here's the warrant that connects the support to the claim. Sometimes we assume that people will get it by just seeing your claim and the evidence, but that's a false assumption. We have to think that there needs to be that next sentence or that next piece that explains to the audience how your evidence is supportive of your claim. So that's an important piece. The next step in the process of writing this, the next strategy, would be to write the first draft after all of that is done, then revising the essay, checking for arrogant language. We want to avoid that, hasty generalizations, faulty conclusions, logical fallacies. Let me talk about logical fallacies again. We talked about that before. So you find one event and you make this assumption that because this happened one time, that this consequence is going to happen because it did for that other event. So the problem with that is that you're just using one example of an event that had a consequence, and then you're making an assumption that everything else that is that same event is going to happen in the same way. That is a logical fallacy, and it's something to avoid. So you need more proof, basically, more evidence, not just the one. Then when you finish your paper, you'll be editing, proofreading using a checklist that's on page 468 and 469 of Langen. Longman, Nadeau and Langen. Check for subject-verb agreement issues, sentence fragments, run-ons, comma splices, faulty parallel structure, misused words, weak vocabulary, and incorrect capitalization punctuation. Those are all issues around grammar that we've discussed. That's long down the road because we're not even to that point of writing the paper yet. But I wanted, the chapter addresses the strategies for writing a paper, and so I wanted to speak about it. Slide number 8 are the steps, okay? So here are the steps for writing an argumentation persuasion. Step 1, create an introduction that begins with revealing the controversy in the thesis statement. Then I have some examples. So you'll want to look at your PowerPoint that shows a broad versus an acceptable thesis. And then also on that slide, it tells you to give support for your thesis. Slide 9 continues with more steps. The third step, look for common ground between yourself and your audience. The fourth step, decide what patterns you'll use. So are you using description, definition, narration, causal analysis, cause and effect, compare, contrast? I'm going to come back to that. Step 5, use the Rogerian strategy, which means recognizing the other viewpoint respectfully and addressing that. So acknowledging what the other side would think, and then you talk about why it isn't so, perhaps. That works with refuting. Step 6, step 7, induction and deduction. Excuse me, that was step 7. And step 8, again, talks about avoiding the logical fallacies, post hoc thinking, a number of different errors that you might make in logic on step 8, okay? And that you can look at page 466, 467 in Longman for more about that. All right, so go to the student essay, which is on page 470. And this is, it's about time, Augusta. That is the title of the essay. This essay is MLA, but I'm more concerned or feel that it's more important to look at it from a perspective of content. It's a very powerful essay and it has a great commentary with it. Okay, so to begin with, we notice that the author starts with this great description, and I really like that. The commentary on page 475 talks about how this contrast, the author starts with talking about the beauty of this golf course and then talks about the ugly. And I think that's really a cool, technique that she uses. So let's look at that. So let me just read that first paragraph. Sports fans across the nation, even those who are not avid golfers, are familiar with the Augusta National Golf Course. Augusta National is the home of what many consider to be the most prestigious golf tournament in the United States, the Masters. Augusta National is one of the most perfectly designed, best maintained, and absolutely gorgeous golf courses in the world. Its visitors find not a single divot that needs to be replaced or one blade of grass leaning in the wrong direction. It's a sight that amazes almost every individual who sets foot on the grounds. Augusta might be the most beautiful golf course in all of America, but the stubbornness of the board and the history of the club have proven to people all over the world that discrimination is alive and well in our country. While Augusta National Golf Club has taken steps in the right direction, its members still have a long way to go if they want to improve the club's tarnished reputation. There is the thesis. What this student is arguing is that the golf course is not offering equal opportunity to all in terms of membership. And so it contrasts this beauty using the description pattern of development and then moving into making us compare contrast of the ugliness and so forth. So very powerful technique there. So that last sentence is your thesis. If you could look with me on page 470, I probably should have already said that, of your Longman Reader. I'm looking at the student essay that is in there. Notice that the next paragraph starts with a topic sentence. So we don't want to forget the foundation that we've learned, that prep organization. We have the point, the reason, the evidence, and the explanation, and the point. So make sure you pay attention to that pattern, that every one of your paragraphs follow that pattern. And if they do, you're automatically going to have a topic sentence, and then you're going to have the evidence and the connection to it. So looking at the essay, skim down to the bottom of page 470, and we see the way that she's combined a parenthetical citation. I think that's good. Let's just look at that. So we'll back up to where the sentence starts and then look at how that parenthetical citation is used and how the words are, follow a nice transition into the paragraph. Indeed, sports has been an agent for change for women in many ways. And then here is what she has cited. Women's desire to play golf not only forced men to accommodate them, but also forced restrictive and antiquated clothing into the closet. And then you see that she has referenced it. This is MLA style, but just a slight change would be the year and a comma after not, and then the year instead of page number. Okay. So that's just gives you a way of looking at how we can combine those expressions in there so that they're not just like something thrown in. Oh, I need to put a quote in here. That's never the way research should work. Okay, turn over to page 471. Let's see. I highlighted this piece that says common knowledge, that there's no need to document. So she makes this common knowledge. It says, however, things have not changed so dramatically at Augusta. To this day, female memberships at the club are few and far between. Now, notice there's no documentation. This is a known fact. And so, she's probably read that from many different sources, and then it can be assumed as a fact when that happens, and you don't document something like that. Okay, and then we have another example of a parenthetical expression if you want to look at how to weave that in naturally into your writing. And then if you skip down, we have the example of another topic sentence and an example of giving attributing a piece of evidence to an author by starting with that. And I like that, so let's look at that. I'm in the middle of the page where it says, at Augusta National, the members make the rules. In her New York Times article that was published the day the club finally admitted its first female members, columnist Karen Krause says, and then it quotes what she says. So it's just a great way of using your resources and citing evidence that fits naturally into the text. Let's move over to page 472. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to point to. Please do read this essay. It's a great essay and a great example to follow. Look at the page 473. Some of you struggled with that in your last paper. So she's quoting something that happens to be more than 3 lines. Notice that toward the end of the paper, it's indented. And then you just indent that whole section of what you've taken from. And then something else interesting, look at the in-text citation where it says QTD. That means quoted in Mies. That means that it was in this Mies article, but it's actually quoted from some other source. So that can kind of get tricky sometimes. Turn over to page 475 and let's look at the commentary now. So I want to look at the audience analysis part because I really liked what it said here. So it says, when planning the essay, Lydia carefully considered how her audience, the students in her composition class, was likely to respond to her argument. Lydia was enrolled in a themed composition class writing about sports, and many of her classmates had been actively engaged in playing sports for most of their lives. Even so, she thought that some of her classmates would initially disagree with her argument about the Augusta National had not done enough to convince Americans it had turned from discriminatory ways. She knew that some of her classmates would need to be persuaded that although Augusta National had taken steps in the right direction, it still had a long way to go toward proving that it had abandoned its discriminatory practices. So she was taking all of that account as she approached the paper. You can see on page 478 how the commentary explains how Lydia goes back in her conclusion to what her original thesis was. And toward the bottom of that commentary on the conclusion, see where it says thesis, then you can see that the thesis has been restated, but not in the same way, in a different way. And that's what we have to remember, that after we write our paper and we come back to the thesis, we're trying to put out there a different way of getting the attention and getting movement from our audience, whether it is that we want them to act or whether it is just that we want them to think or feel as new the way that we do, or maybe become more passionate about the subject. So the thesis, mentioned again in the conclusion, goes like this. It is time for Augusta National Golf Club to prove to the country that it has moved beyond its discriminating policies, and that she goes on to suggest specific steps the club should take to improve its tarnished reputation. So she's not just saying that. It is using discriminating policies, but she's talking about, okay, here's what could be done to stop that. All right. So anyway, that's all I have for you. You were supposed to, I don't know if I mentioned that on the agenda, for this week, you were supposed to read just one essay that is an argumentation, whether it was from the chapter or whether it was from your Blackboard, and post something in the discussion board about that. So summarize it and discuss a strength or weakness, just because I wanted to make sure that you read at least one. Okay? All right, signing off.